So here we are, the OTTRED Spotlight podcast with Barry Dubovsky. Barry, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
I'm looking forward to our conversation because we've known each other for a short period of time. You've got one of these amazing careers, Barry, where the stuff that you've done, the locations that you've done it in, and the kind of stories that you've got, particularly the anecdotes that I hope you'll share with us today from your most recent chapter of your career, I think will be enlightening when it comes to the people that are listening to this podcast. Just to reiterate, the reason that I do this podcast with people at your level, interesting individuals, is to bring your story to the sector so that other people can hear how you've got to the level that you're at, executive level with a lot of influence and sway on essentially entities that are touching hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people's lives for yourself and some of the other guests that I've had on. So what I'd love to do, Barry, is we'll touch on your career. I want to touch on some aspects of the industry and your personal posture and perspective of that. But first of all, I think it's important to acquaint people with who you are. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Barry.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So Barry Dubovsky. So I've had a very diverse career, as you say. I grew up in Australia. My background is actually Ukrainian. So Russian was the first language that I spoke. Went to school not knowing a word of English back in the day. Also dabbled in Japanese, believe it or not. And that was something that I did for about 14 or so years.
Wow.
I don't ask me a single thing to say in Japanese.
I think that's more than a dabble, Barry.
Yeah, well, exactly. Maybe now it's a dabble after not practicing for that long. But that was a bit of an experience. And I was actually going to be headed down more like a foreign affairs diplomacy type pathway career-wise. And that actually never played out because I did international relations at university and did an honours in international business, and I think the private sector was far more exciting for me relative to learning about political economy and those sorts of things. That was a little bit dry for my liking, not everyone's cup of tea. And then started gravitating towards the world of consulting, spent a good chunk of my early career working at Deloitte, was in the strategy and operations function, and was kind of the intermediary between the S&O practice and Deloitte Digital, which was forming at the time, and really enjoyed it, and was really focusing in on digital strategy type work, and actually did the digital strategy for Deloitte Australia back in the day. Hopefully they actually used it. And off the back of that, moved into a position at Telstra, which is one of Australia's biggest telcos. Not the one that recently had the big outage. I can say that. and then out of nowhere, get tapped on the shoulder and get asked to come to Dubai and look after digital for sub-Saharan African markets within the media, broadcasting and entertainment industry, which was as crazy as it sounds to say it out loud. I still pinch myself that I've done it now for almost 6 years. Yeah. Multiple roles within that business, a company called MultiChoice. And went through a period where I'd wake up not knowing which African market I was actually in, whether it was Ghana, whether it was Nigeria, whether it was Kenya, which is quite wild for someone of my background, being, to be honest, really sheltered, based in Sydney and not leaving a 5-kilometre radius in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. So it's been an absolute journey, totally wild, and I wouldn't have picked another pathway if I had it over again.
You've got a really interesting story, Barry. I remember the first time we met and you started talking to me, about all of the things you've done. I was really kind of arrested when you told me you speak fluent Russian as well. I was like, this is a really interesting guy, There's so much I want to learn about this guy. So that's why I wanted to get you on the Spotlight podcast. I want to ask you a question, actually. I'm going to go back to the consulting chapter of your career and the telco chapter, but between the telco and the most recent chapter in kind of media, entertainment, broadcasting, how did that happen? Were you headhunted? The tap on the shoulder, what was that?
Yeah, I think it's just, developing, a pretty decent reputation throughout the three separate entities that I was, involved in. And essentially, when I was at Deloitte, Telstra was my client.
Yeah.
So what we were doing there was a lot of digital transformation work for Telstra. There was a major focus around increasing digital channel share, digital penetration, transaction volumes, steering them away from call centers, retail shops, doing them all digitally. The commercial benefits are clear around that. So that's what we were tasked with pushing. We did some really cool things like, develop, Australia's first digital-only postpaid plan, which was something that at the time was never before done, and you could only service it digitally. So, it was some really kind of transformative stuff that we were doing at the time, which was really exciting. And as part of that work, whilst I was a consultant working at Telstra, got along really well with my client, who's now a close friend of mine. And he said, look, mate, there's an opportunity here. I'm going to keep re-engaging you every single time. So you may as well just...
you might as well give it.
Change it up and change the email domain that you're using and come work for us. And it's actually an interesting experience for me, because at the time I had an opportunity to move to New York. With Deloitte, and that was something that I always was really excited or really interested in doing at some point in my career, was to travel. And I had a decision to make at the time, and it was actually, almost like out of a movie, where I'd made my mind up and said, look, I'm going to go and do New York with Deloitte, and it's an amazing career opportunity. Let me be selfish once in my life. And at the same time, my father was actually recovering from a big illness. And even though that was playing out, I was like, Dad, I want to do it my way. I'm not doing anything stupid here. I'm going for a big career opportunity. Told my client at the time that, hey, thanks for the offer, but I'm going to go and work at Deloitte New York. Went down as well as you'd imagine. And then literally went to sign the contract. And it was like that moment where you just like, I cannot physically press submit on this contract, really? Because I couldn't do it, right? And that was, again, obviously what played out, personally. And, I felt it was the right thing to do to still stay in Sydney at the time. And then literally call the client back the day later, go, hey, the conversation we had yesterday, I've actually changed my mind. Hopefully you can still, that offer's still on the table. And then the rest is history. So that was quite a pivotal moment in my career as to where I ended up. And, this whole sliding door situation, you don't know where this will end up, and fortunately, it's played out really well. And then with Telstra, same kind of situation. I had some contacts I was working with quite closely as part of the Telstra media team. Hadn't heard from the guy in a while, and then called me out of the blue and just asked if I was interested in doing a gig based in Dubai. And I mean, I had to Google a couple of cities and countries and figure out what was actually being presented my way. And 6 years later, we're here to tell the story.
Wow, there's so many things. I need to stay focused here, Barry, because there's so many things that I could ask you about, and I want to make sure we stay focused on that. Most of the audience for the podcast is in the kind of broadcast and OTT sector, but just a couple more things, if you don't mind. What was childhood like in Australia? I think you mentioned kind of Bondi Beach, kind of, that kind of lifestyle. What was it like growing up in Australia?
I think probably fortunate is the best way to describe it, right? Which was why it was such a big decision for me to ultimately move many, many years later. Growing up in Sydney, it's a very comfortable lifestyle. It's outdoorsy. The weather's pretty good most of the time. People are very outgoing and, like to spend a lot of time outside. So look, my childhood was also characterized with being an only child and having a lot of time, doing a lot of extracurricular activities, whether it was doing extra work after school and doing coaching classes and learning Japanese and playing the piano. And I was a swimmer and trained 8 times a week. And so there was a lot of stuff that I was doing by sheer virtue that, the parents were pretty intense. I can say that quite comfortably. And wanted to make sure that I get the best opportunity growing up that they never had, being, growing up in the Soviet Union, in the 50s and the 60s. It was a very different world, and that was by virtue of them moving to Oz, was to give me a better life than what they could give themselves or what they had, exposure to. So it was awesome. I would never, think otherwise. And I think, look, long term, whenever that is, Australia will definitely be home at some point. But for the time being, I'm just enjoying the ride that I'm in right now, sitting in Silicon Oasis and kind of reflecting on some of these career journeys that I've had over the 15 or so years that I've been in the market.
What would you say that you've? I've got to say, the way you come across to me is kind of exactly what I think of Australian guy. You're outgoing, you're a really kind of positive guy to be around, very easy to be around. very sporty. You know, you seem like someone that really pushes yourself as well. And you've just kind of alluded to that as well with everything extracurricular, to use your word that you'd use. Do you think that's one of the hallmarks of Barry Dubovsky? Is that one of the things that people would say about you if I was to ask your friends or people that have worked closely with you?
I think, I mean, not to talk it up, but I think being driven was instilled in me both from my upbringing and the activities that I participated in. Swimming is a demanding sport, man. It is a lonely sport.
Yeah.
You're going up and down at 5 a.m. for hours on end, and you're playing mind games with yourself, you know, constantly. Maybe that explains some of the personality defects from time to time as well. But I think it definitely did instill a sense of purpose and a sense of like, hey, I want to actually do something here and commit to something and really relentlessly pursue, you know, positive outcomes that you can then celebrate and then move on to something else, because you're constantly striving for bigger and better things. And fortunately, I'd say that has come through thus far in my career. I think if you ask my team now, how would they categorize me, or kind of how would they describe who I am? I mean, it's really around drive and pushing, and, you know, we celebrate the wins and we have a great time doing it, but, you know, we're treating it like it is a competition, right? You're competing against right now some of the biggest media players globally. It's a David and Goliath story with what we're doing at Showmax right now, you know, and it's something that, you know, we take a lot of pride and we're really passionate about being on the winning side of that equation. And again, for sure, my background has played a huge role in instilling that drive and that dedication to winning and continually striving to be better.
Yeah. Okay, let's focus on this kind of broadcast chapter, right? So you've been in consulting, you've worked for Deloitte, you've moved a period in time when I was in telco as well, over into Telstra, when they were dramatically trying to move from the speeds and feeds mentality into a more consultative mentality. So I can see what that career transition was all about. Then you moved to Dubai and start MultiChoice.
Yep.
What was your first impressions of the broadcast and media sector? How stark a contrast was that?
Look, I think at a headline for me, what excited me the most about the sector was something that I can relate to a lot more than, you know, being in a telco, for example, and a lot of the industries that I was involved with during my consulting career. Because, I mean, that's the thing with consulting. You basically try before you buy. You're involved in millions of different industries. And what I really found that played out in my career was those industries and those issues that I could relate to almost at a personal hobby type level reflected best in my own performance because I was so much more vested, right? And that was something that going into MultiChoice, it kind of was the best of both worlds. It was a digital role that I initially started in, and it was media and entertainment. Like, who can not enjoy doing something in media and entertainment? Like, it's something that you spend your personal time, you know, experiencing, and you're being a customer, you know, outside of the time that you're at work. So for me, that was a real kind of eye opener and something that I really enjoyed, and it was clear from the get go. Look, the other element was the fact that you're operating in Africa, right? That is, I mean, I don't know how much time we have on this podcast, but if you want to extend it by a couple of hours, there's probably some more stuff I could talk about, but that was an eye opener. Like, I never really had massive travel plans to go to Africa, right? It was never really on my radar. But to go and experience a place, and you can't even generalize by saying Africa, every market is unique, right? And understanding how much media and entertainment is an outlet for, you know, the majority of people across the continent, a way to escape reality, a way to kind of experience, you know, stories that they tell, you know, their own children, and they share with their families, and they can get around the TV, you know, and experience it. How passionate they are about sport. You know, like the EPL in Africa is a religion, man.
Really?
Right? Like, I'd be scared telling people what team I support, being a Chelsea fan, in case, you know, they're an Arsenal fan or they're a Man United fan, right? I mean, maybe in Dubai sometimes you go to a pub as well, you might have the similar issue. But they take it so seriously. And to be involved in that, and then kind of fusing the two worlds around something that you're really passionate in, seeing how much of a positive impact it has on the population and the demographic you're involved in, you're really onto something special, which is, I mean, Chris, I said to myself and to my my old man and my partner, 18 months, 2 years, I'll be in Dubai, I'll do this thing. Let's see see how it goes. I've not looked back.
Yeah.
And I've really loved every step of the journey. It's been phenomenal, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't get an opportunity to experience because they never took that big step. And I had to get out of my comfort zone to move to Dubai and to start working within this organization that to be honest, if you ask me 9 times out of 10, I probably would have said I'd never do it.
Yeah. Give everyone and me a feeling for what MultiChoice is. Give us some dimensions of that business.
So look, it's an entertainment company at its core. It's been around for many decades, right? It's essentially launched, I think, one of the first pay TV services globally, believe it or not just in Africa. So entertainment and content is at the core of the business model. Right now, we're looking at broader adjacencies. There's betting businesses, there's payment businesses, and obviously a lot of logical parallels being brought into the business. But it's been a fantastic place that has been great to me. Right, I can safely say that I've given a lot to the business purely from me being so passionate about what I was doing. I have to say my most recent role at Showmax has been the most gratifying and satisfying of the lot because of the sheer impact on commercial performance and the mandate that I had. And that's been phenomenal for me. And, what's great about the business is that it rewards and recognizes, contribution, delivery, performance, right? We did some really kind of groundbreaking things within the digital space. For MultiChoice, initially, we launched new self-service platforms, and again, some of the key learnings that I took away from my time at Telstra, granted different market and different operating conditions, applied it to operating in Africa, right? And I guess the African market wouldn't have necessarily had a lot of the capability that we then brought into the market and into the industry. So it was really rewarding to see your products out in market, they're being promoted on air, on billboards, and it's really satisfying. And the uptake was there, which meant that there was recognition of the team and great career opportunities for all of us involved.
So MultiChoice is in sub-Saharan Africa. MultiChoice, from a legacy perspective, is one of the main providers from a linear perspective, right? And Showmax is the kind of OTT element of that.
Yes.
How many countries does Showmax serve in total?
It's over 50.
Wow.
Right? It's not small fry. Granted, though, we can't focus everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? And there is a handful of markets that we know we really kind of put in the right amount of focus or sufficient focus, and some of them are like, look, let's switch on the product and the proposition, but the content, let's say, isn't necessarily geared towards certain markets. So obviously South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana right now are some of our biggest markets, but down the line there's a lot of aspiration around supercharging growth in some of the other territories, particularly with the recent joint venture with Sky, NBC, Universal, because we need to be growing at an even faster rate, and we need to be outpacing the market. We need to be setting the market position in terms of subscriber volume. So at the moment, safe to say, we've got a very strong and robust team based out of Randburg in Johannesburg. We recently built up a team in Nigeria and Lagos as well that I was visiting, I think, a couple of months ago. And obviously we've got some resources in Kenya, so we do need to fortify some of the main priority markets that we're looking at. But as I said, every market is unique, Chris. Like every single market has its own nuances, its own priorities, and it's not a one size fits all approach.
I was just thinking that even from a content acquisition perspective, because if you're serving, look, the UK, right, where I'm from, Europe is 2% of the world's land mass. And the UK is kind of 2% of that. It's so small. But if I think of the cultural nuances just across the UK, viewing preferences, etc., it's distinct and tangible. Then you put that into, a continent the size of Africa, there must be massive sways in terms of content consumption. Yeah. How do you drive the content acquisition strategy for a company that's trying to serve that many different markets?
Well, look, initially we have to start with prioritization, right? It comes back to your business plan, your growth markets. We obviously look at the price of the data across each of these territories to see which one is the most relevant streaming market for us, right? And as part of that, then, the business plans are formed, marketing budgets are approved. And in terms of content acquisition, look, we know in South Africa, for example, where we spent the bulk of the time nurturing this proposition, what kind of content resonates most. We know that if we want to really kind of get some quick growth, big reality franchises do phenomenally well for us, right? If we want to try and, get a captive audience for an extended period, we want to be looking at long-term telenovelas, which are like these epic dramas that we put into market as well. And, there's a lot of focus right now around content analytics and understanding, what is the actual commercial impact of every single piece of content that we put on the platform, right? And that's something that we continue to monitor quite regularly. But overall, things like having content discovery engines, to your point, right? That, we've got so many different cohorts sitting within one market, let alone all the markets that we operate in. You can't be serving, your Zulu, we call it the Mzansi base Afrikaans content. They're going to go, hey guys, there's nothing here for me on the platform. Meanwhile, there's thousands of titles that aren't being surfaced to that particular customer. And one thing about the African audience is price sensitive, right? If the content's not there at the time that they're logging in, you basically lost that customer for a very long time, and unless there is something majorly tent-polish that's going to bring them back into the environment. So you've got to get it right, basically. And there's no second chances.
I'm listening to everything you're saying and just imagining what a difference having all of that data must have been like to the organization when you've got the kind of Showmax thing where all of a sudden you've got this insight into what devices people are on, what they're watching, their demographic, their location. All of a sudden you've got this window of insight into, right, how are we going to orientate this intelligence to become more effective? But that must have been thousands and thousands of data points. The activity to do data research must be massive at Showmax.
It was definitely a game changer moving from, let's say, running digital for the pay TV, the traditional business, to essentially running a digital business, right? And to your point, like the exposure to all of these different data inputs and sources was actually overwhelming up front, right? It was like, we've got everything, and now how do we make sense of it? So it's really around that transition from reporting to insights generation, which has been the journey that we've been on over the last couple of years in particular, to understand, well, what viewing habits customers show or don't show prior to churning. And then as part of that, how do we start putting offers proactively in front of them at the time where they're starting to show symptoms of churn, that you keep those customers engaged on the base for longer. So everything is tracked, right? We know that there's certain content discovery or certain the algorithms are enabling us to surface content to people during the day that are more kids orientated, because we know that the kids are the ones watching the content for the most part during the day, right? And then you adjust that algorithm in the evening to show more of those Real Housewives of Lagos type shows that you're not going to be surfacing during the day. So everything is, data backed, which is fantastic, and it enables us to make a lot more smarter decisions. But I guess within the context of Africa as well, what we're seeing is a lot of the digital data and the online data is one part of the equation. We also need to solve for offline, right? So there's almost like an element of, the pay TV business kind of rearing its head again within a digital, content consumption environment, where we also need to drive physical sales. We need to make sure that our retention activity for customers that sign up through physical channels, because Africa still loves paying through cash.
Right. Okay.
Right. How do we keep those customers connected? So there's a whole parallel set of strategy that we need to be running to cater for those customers that is just not your stock standard credit card, PayPal, recurring payments every month. To be honest, if we had it that way, it'd just be easy. Right. The Africa is just full of, a lot of, let's call them challenges, right, where people don't necessarily trust the banking institutions. They do not have credit cards. They still like to transact through cash-based means. We hear the expression, you need to win the streets, right? No data that's going to tell you, how do you win the streets, right? But it's about being present. It's having trade marketing. It's to drive talkability both online and offline. There are so many things that we've picked up working in this environment for a couple of years now. And, obviously data is a massive driver of what we do, but a lot of it's also working with the local teams in market who live and breathe Nigeria and Lagos, right? And Nairobi, and getting their steer as to what is the best way to transact. And that's something that we really need to continue focusing on.
How important is advertising?
Look, I think for us, longer term, the advertising model is definitely worthwhile, right? It's not something that we are launching with the new Showmax that's coming in the new year. Okay. But anything, Chris, that reduces the barrier to entry and the total cost of ownership for a product is something that we absolutely need to be looking at, right? I mean, unfortunately, in some of our key markets, the currencies devalue by 50% overnight. So overnight, the cost of bread goes up twice as much as it was the day before. And that is no different within an OTT or a streaming or an entertainment type context. So, I think through the lens of advertising coming in and us, leveraging the scale that we've already built up, over many years and continue to supercharge with the new joint venture, bringing in an AVOD type model is absolutely something that the teams are currently exploring, because obviously it's a separate revenue source, and equally it makes it a lot more palatable for the mass market to experience the product.
It's funny, it brings me back to a conversation I had a couple of years ago with a guy called Jean-Francois Pigeon, who is the SVP of Sales and Marketing globally for Cinemedia. And he said to me, I was talking about emerging markets, kind of tiger economies to him, and he said to me, look, Chris, this might sound weird to you, but in emerging economies where disposable income is much, much more shallow, if families have to choose between chicken and entertainment, i.e. feed your family, or entertainment, a lot of the time they'll choose entertainment because that's their escape. That is that, they've got the complexion of life is that watching one of the shows that you mentioned, that's their kind of family time. That's what they do. So that's kind of, you'd think they'd just go, well, we haven't got the disposable income for the SVOD services. We're going to choose chicken. He said, actually, Chris, you might be surprised at what the reaction is. Would you concur with that? Have you seen similar decision-making trends?
I was laughing because, it's literally right up there in like anyone's hierarchy of needs. And we're calling it needs because, as I said, it's people's ways to disconnect from reality and to immerse themselves for a couple of hours a day on, something that gets them away from day to day. And it's ironic when you say chicken. I was in Lagos, I think this was last year, and there was a stand that took payments for Showmax, and we were kind of interrogating what the process would look like. Is it a clean UX, and do people even know their email addresses? The answer is not always, by the way. Yeah. And then meanwhile, in front of it, there's just like a massive bucket of like just eggs marinating, right? And we're like, hold on, what's this thing? It's like, oh no, well, she's just getting it. It's the lady who's taking payment. She's marinating her eggs for dinner later. We're like, does it have to be so close to the Showmax signs and like the how-to when the value props are? No, leave them. Okay. So it's like anything goes, right? And it's fascinating. And look, price sensitivity is a massive barrier across the continent. Like we see, going back to your point around data, that our disconnect rates, the further away you get from payday, almost double.
Really?
Right? So literally people are living month to month. Like you're literally looking at your performance stats around payday, and everyone's like, oh, we'll take a half day because things are looking great. Like this is just awesome. We've just grown so much. We've reconnected a bunch of customers who left us previously and everything's looking rosy. Fast forward 3 weeks, right? and you've got a very different picture on your hands, right? Because just the affordability situation really kicks in. We've got something coming up now, which we've termed it officially as January, right? Because you get paid early in December.
Yeah.
So instead of a 4-week delta from payday to payday, you now have a 6-week delta. So whilst December is going to look good, and the 15th to the 16th of December, we've got really good content right now, and we're really confident in how it's going to play out. Come the middle of Jan, just before payday, it's going to be doom and gloom, and we're going to be scratching our heads and going, well, what different interventions can we be putting in here to keep these guys connected or bring them back in sooner? So it's a tough mark. I was told, maybe just one very quick anecdote. I was told when I first got a job at MultiChoice, and particularly the Showmax one, was if you can sell streaming in this market, you can do it anywhere in the world, right? Because there are just so many challenges and so many hurdles to overcome, and you need to be on top of your game in every single lever that has a potential to impact a customer as to whether they become customers or not. If you get any of those wrong, forget about it, and you're going to have a rough month.
It's crazy. I can only imagine what those the subscription retention oscillations must look like. You kind of see that probably more shallow and protracted in other continents, and in Africa it seems like it must be
an eye out with those charts.
Yeah, I can imagine. Pretty dangerous to look at for too long.
Exactly.
What's the most? What is the leading content in Africa? What are the favorite shows?
No, so as I said, I mean, outside of sport, which I'll touch on in a second, the realities they've got a known name, like these Real Housewives franchises. They just immediately, the second you put something on social that is a teaser around an upcoming season, of season 4 of Real Housewives of Durban in South Africa, as soon as you get that, the social media engagement is through the roof.
Wow.
Right? And we actually, what's interesting, we actually use social as a barometer to get a sense of the commercial impact of a show. If you put something up there and no one likes it, and there's no comments, and people just put, crypto messages on there, just the usual stuff, right? And then you go, okay, we've got some work to do on this title, because we've not either, the marketing's not been as compelling enough, or there's just a real grooming of that show that's going to require a lot of ongoing nurturing to give it to, to get it to a point where it starts delivering some commercial momentum for us. We had a show, funny enough, a couple of years ago, in South Africa called The Wife, which was an adaptation of a book that was really popular amongst a certain kind of, that Zulu cohort. And we were doing our usual thing. We were planning our go-to-market activity for the show, and, getting our teasers and our trailers ready to go, and, our marketing plans. I spoke to my head of marketing, and I was like, how do you think this show's going to go? Like, I mean, we've seen stuff like this before. And like, is this going to do something for us? Like, where is this tagged at? What level are we? What's the benchmark? And, she said to me, look, we don't really know, right? Because we've not done a show like this in the past. But we do know there's a cult following, around the book. Okay. So there is some chance it could do something, right? And then literally the day we put up the teaser trailer for this show, we had probably about 100 times more social engagement that I think I've ever seen on anything coming out of Showmax previously. It was trending and went viral all over, Twitter at the time, and Instagram was going nuts. And we're like, okay, there's seemingly some legs here. And literally, our base over the course of the next 6 months, I would say grew by probably 70%.
Wow. Right?
Because people were so obsessed with that particular piece of content, and you had your super fans, and we had this thing called the 5 a.m. club, that when a show would be put up and uploaded at 5 a.m., I think it was a Thursday morning. I still remember the day, considering how important those Thursdays were to us. And you would have engagement on social literally from the morning, and the show would trend for days on end every time there was a new episode drop. So it takes the right content. You have to understand your market and understand what really makes, these people tick, and market it well, right? And be present on channels where people who you're targeting live on, right? So social channels are massive. TikTok has blown up for us over the last, 18 months or so as a really critical commercial marketing channel.
TikTok's crazy. It's unbelievable how influential TikTok is.
It's crazy, right? So making sure that you're bundling the content with the audience, with the marketing channels. I mean, that's part of the winning formula, right? So when you ask me about the type of content, it is varied, and different shows do different things and attract different cohorts, but there is a certain level of similarity around how we actually go to market. But it's just being clear on who you're going after, how you're positioning it to them, and how do you ensure that they're excited about what you're bringing to the market.
When you've had those moments, Barry, you've kind of been in the hot seat. You've operated at C-suite level in these organizations that are reaching out to this massive continent. How does it feel when you get that moment where you're like, this is happening? This is going to go really well. Everything's trending in the right direction. What's that feeling like when you're working at such a senior level in a big organization and everything's looking green?
I tell you what, I never experienced that feeling until I moved into the Showmax role. And the reason why is it almost feels like, to use an anecdote for people who play fantasy football, it's literally like that. Like, your strikers have scored, you've put a triple captain in for your midfielder, he's got 6 assists, and you're walking around going, I love this stuff. Yeah. Like, how good is it? And that's literally how we feel every time that we're launching new shows and we're seeing really positive responses. I feel sorry for my partner that I've been at times at dinner on a weekend when I knew that there was a big set of EPL games that were dropping, or a new show was launching, and I'm following my payments data literally whilst at the dinner table. She's like, well, can you not? I'm like, well, priorities, so that just shows just like the level of interest and excitement that it brings. And you celebrate it with the team. Suddenly the WhatsApp channels go crazy. Everyone's posting about screenshots from Twitter and people's comments, and like, Showmax, you really get us. And it's just really satisfying, right? Because not only is it you're running a commercial business, but going back to the point of you're entertaining people, right? And there's a positive impact, culturally, that you're playing an active role. It's ironic me saying it, being an Aussie from Bondi, but I've managed to really, immerse myself in the market that I'm operating in, that I don't see myself as sure, I am an Aussie from Bondi, but, I'm starting to pronounce the name of the shows better, right? Because I'm just so, entrenched in what I'm doing. And it's just really exciting to see something that you are so passionate about and spend so many hours of the day focusing on actually trend in the right direction.
You know what, when you talk about that, I can kind of feel the energy, it ignites you when you talk about you and the team. And when that constellation of people in an organization gets something right, it's like, this is great.
Yeah.
Talk to me about sports in Africa. I get the feeling that creates a distinct gravity of its own. You mentioned the EPL.
Yeah. I tell you what, coming into MultiChoice and seeing what SuperSport offers. So SuperSport is the sports entity, sports arm of the business. The amount of sports rights and the breadth of sports rights that it has, it's like, I don't know, maybe Sky 15, 20 years ago, or, it has everything. Like, there's in Oz, we had, UFC and boxing fights on things like Main Event, the pay-per-views. SuperSport has everything. I'm like, how can anyone complain about this business ever when everything is aggregated under the one umbrella for a fixed price? And I mean, it's better the devil you know. I'm sure a lot of the customers don't know what goes on globally and the whole disaggregation of sports rights that exists out there. No one really cares about that. But the fact is, it's insane, right? And look, for me, sports is in my blood, right? All the way back from when I was swimming, and I was playing basketball for many years after that, where I had a bit of a growth spurt, and then football, is something that I spent time with my grandfather back in the day watching, for many, many years. And it's really exciting, going back to the point around, being passionate about the content and the industry that you're in. I mean, sports on another level for me. Like, we did some really cool things with the Showmax Pro product last year with the World Cup in Qatar, and we launched it in 4K for the first time to the percentage of the audience that can actually experience 4K. Again, we're talking about Africa, and not everyone has the new 85-inch Samsung 8K device. But still, it was a massive achievement and a big win. And, you know, kudos to the team for being able to deliver that, you know, that capability in quite a short time frame. But again, going back to a major sporting event, marketed right, the product being well received in the market, with good features and functionality, we saw like a 4 times growth of the Showmax Pro product over the course of the World Cup. Next challenge was for us to keep those guys once the World Cup ended. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a break, but then the EPL returned shortly after. So our retention of that base was actually quite good. But again, you know, it's all about, you know, I'm watching games, I'm looking at payments numbers, it all kind of fits and it all kind of comes together. So a lot of exciting things on the horizon, I think, with the new joint venture. And, you know, we've just announced that we are launching the first, essentially the first global direct-to-consumer EPL mobile product, right? Sure, it's via Showmax as the intermediary, but if you want to get EPL on your mobile for a very low price, you know, this is the product that's going to, you know, hopefully take over the continent, right? And we're really excited about doing that. And again, like, you know, thinking about what can we do with the EPL and speaking to the EPL directly. How can you guys help us market it? You know, can we get players to come to our launch event? I mean, it doesn't feel like work sometimes, right? It's really doing stuff that you'd want to be doing in your spare time, which again is why it makes it so exciting, right?
I want to bring it back up again, Barry, to you. So you've done a lot, you know, in a relatively short space in time. You're not an old guy when it comes to the stage that you're at. You know, a lot of people that have reached your level are much older when it comes to the time that they've taken to get to that level. At this juncture in your career, what are the things that you would say you love most about what you've learned that you're looking forward to exercising or growing more in the coming chapters of your career?
So I think focusing on growth, taking something that is either in its, you know, early genesis or infancy, or something that is mature that needs a good kick up the, you know what, right? That is something that really excites me. When there's tangible outcomes, right? I had a great time working in the digital space where we launched capability, but that was almost an enabler for the core business, right? And for me, being actively involved in the core business, being involved in what is exactly, you know, touching the customer is something that I'm really passionate about, right? It's what we've been doing at Showmax. And once I got a taste for it, you know, that's a space I want to be in, right? And, excuse me, you get a daily report card from your customers, right? If you do well, you get green ticks and you're trending in the right direction. If you mess something up or your content doesn't hit or your marketing execution wasn't up to scratch, or Netflix or some of your key competitors have come in and have done something bigger and better than you, right? Which they can from time to time. You'll get caned, right? And it's the reality. So it's reflective of life. You get what you put in, right? And it's something that I definitely will want to continue doing well into the future because you're really vested, right? You think about it a lot. You think about ways that you can supercharge growth. You can think about things that worked and you double down on them. You think about things that didn't work and what you can do differently. And you also need to be on the bleeding edge of innovation, right? And that's something that, you know, I think I needed to be doing more at because you get so ingrained in day to day that you don't necessarily have a view of what's going on around you. And that's something that I think I need to spend a bit more time on.
Yeah. Okay. Final question for you then, buddy. This is something that I ask everyone since the first episode that I did of Series 1. We're now on Series 4. If you could give some advice to the younger you, what would it be?
It's a good question. I think at the headline, enjoy the ride, because you can't predict where you'll end up, what you'll do. Stress less. Stress because you're passionate, I get that. But stress isn't necessarily the healthiest thing at the levels that you might experience it at from time to time. But life is unpredictable, right? But enjoy it and go with it. Because I'm sitting here again in Silicon Oasis. I had to Google where this is, by the way. You know, having spent, you know, many trips to Africa, being in, I remember the first time that I was told about what I'd be experiencing in Africa. And I'm sure the guys in the team were also taking the piss just to see how I'd rile up, because they're like, oh, this is easy target, a guy from Bondi, going to be shipped out to Lagos for a couple of weeks. So I was easy prey at the time, but who on earth thought that would be something that I'd end up doing? My friends back at home are like, you are the last person we would ever expect to do what you're doing now. And it wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't just like, well, let's just pack up our stuff and go. There were some periods where I was like, have I made the right decision? I don't know anyone. It's a Saturday night. Do I go work on my digital strategy? Do I go make some friends? I don't know. But looking back now, and the advice I'd give to myself is just enjoy the opportunity and take it in stride, because you just don't know how things will play out. Here we go.
Good advice. Barry Dubovsky, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for taking the time to come and speak to us here at Studio Red for this series of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. We've talked about every chapter of your career. You've definitely educated me on what sub-Saharan Africa's like in so many different dimensions. And I just want to say thanks for coming on the show.
Brilliant. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Chris. Cheers.